we're going to move to Ukraine, Russia, because there's nothing else I can say about the situation. Yes.
I want to raise the question of Crimea because the U.S. position, as was outlined by Vice President Vance, indicates that the U.S. proposal does indicate that Russia would retain sovereignty over Crimea and other territories. It was just a few years ago that former Senator Rubio co-sponsored legislation that would prevent Russia from ever having sovereignty over Crimea because of its origins. Can you explain what has changed that has made the Secretary think that this is a balanced offer and a proposal that Mr. Zelensky and Ukraine should accept?
I've said before, I'll say again, even to you, that we can't negotiate this. It's certainly not going to be negotiated in this room.
Now it's on the record from the Vice President when in India he...
Well, that's it. He's the Vice President and making a statement. It's not my job, nor will I parse his words or assign a meaning to them. What I do know, as I think as we all know, negotiations continue. There's a conversation that continues. That was the impression I was left with the conversation out of the Oval Office, is that both President Trump and Secretary Rubio were there. They engaged and answered questions about what's coming forward, what's possible. The President indicated he still thinks peace is possible. The Secretary has added, though, that if this is going to end, it's really going to take the two parties to make that decision. They're going to have to make that decision. Can I ask, what I would say about Crimea is what President Trump has said. I'm sure you saw that Truth Social post. And I'll read a little bit of that. We can have that in the record. President Trump on Truth Social noted, Ukrainian President Zelensky is boasting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. There's nothing to talk about here, end quote. The statement is very harmful to the peace negotiations with Russia in that Crimea was lost years ago under the auspices of President Obama and is not even a point of discussion. Now, his message continues, but that was the general point about Crimea from the president himself. And were you going to follow up on something else after that?
Just generally, the issue of Crimea and of territory that is now controlled by Russia. Mm-hmm. Does the Secretary believe that a balanced proposal would have Russia also making some concessions?
The Secretary's made statements actually recently in an interview, and I'll read some of those comments. I think he has also said, though, that there's going to have to be concessions on both sides. He's made that clear. We also know that the details of those concessions were not going to be discussed or agreed upon until there was a ceasefire. And that dynamic still exists. But the Secretary's been clear from the start that there would be concessions from both sides in this regard.